Go for it.
Okay, this is Victoria King, and I'm from Canada, and I'm from a province called Ontario. And I just wanted you Americans to know that where I come from, the premier of our province of Ontario is a man by the name of Doug Ford. Doug Ford has very publicly stated, you can Google this if you like, that Canada and Ontario has no racism. There's no divisionism here or separatism, and everything is all good. He did this very publicly, by the way, like the media and everything. And this couldn't be farther from the truth. Ontario is a very racist province. I'm a brown person, and I'm a First Nations Native American, and I have experienced white supremacy in my lifetime and in the province of Ontario. So sadly, well, how did Doug Ford get in there? In case you're wondering, well, we vote here in Ontario, like we vote them in. I obviously did not vote for Doug Ford, but sadly, I just, for those of you in the States, for some of us who are from Canada, yes, that is sadly what is happening here. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for sharing, Victoria. We really appreciate it. Yeah, I think that Wyoming has the same kind of mentality that racism and things like that don't exist. There were a lot of comments about that being made by people who were against marches in the state. What do y'all think about this? Do y'all have any experience with this? Let's talk about it.
Well, today, when I was watching the live stream of the march that happened this afternoon, I was, reading the comments, just kind of skimming through them and like lurking what people would say online. So upon lurking through those comments, a lot of people were commenting on the fact that, or not the fact, but like their belief that white privilege doesn't exist, even though it does. And especially here in Wyoming, we're very sheltered from a lot of that stuff, unfortunately. In my experience anyway, I was sheltered until I turned about 16 and was able to roam the internet freely. Being brought up into a conservative household and things like that. And when you learn about, oppression and things like that, and you finally have your eyes start to like be open to those sort of things, and then your views change. And so like, I didn't know that I had white privilege until I turned 16. And like, it's uncomfortable, to like know that. And I think a lot of this is having to be uncomfortable in order to like change your mindset and change your ways.
Thank you for sharing. So I think that brings up a pretty good topic of conversation for us, one that we were trying to get at a little bit earlier. White privilege, what is your experience with it? We want to hear from, as many of you as we can. So anybody who's willing to share, please feel free.
I can mention one. I don't know how many other white folks have been party to this, but I know there was a time when a number of years ago, I was eating in a restaurant with a friend and my daughter was little. And it's other white folks who assume you have the same racist viewpoint. And a gentleman a number of years older than myself came up and started talking to my friend and I, just making light conversation. nothing out of the blue, but took a hard left off into some racist rhetoric and comments I don't, made me extremely uncomfortable, and I nearly choked on my food hearing it. And my friend was there and beat me to the punch of, chasing the man off. We were in a Mexican restaurant. He was making horrible comments, derogatory comments about Mexicans and anyone of Hispanic descent or this and that, and just flying off the handle. And my friend immediately said something and shut him down, and the man looked offended himself and walked off that we didn't share that same viewpoint. And it's come up a number of times in my life where someone assumes that because you're white, you're going to share their same racist viewpoint. And I think it's hard, and I think it's important to shut that down. So, and I know I've not always done it. I've not always stepped to the plate because I'm scared. And I think that's hard for white folks because you're scared of what others are going to think about you. But you need to realize what privilege you have, and you need to be willing to call out, no matter who it is and who is saying it to you. You need to call people out on whatever racist trope that they're spewing at the moment.
Is it okay if I jump on for a second?
Yeah, of course.
I totally agree with what you're saying, and I kind of want to bounce off of that. It's going to sound a little sidetracked for a second, but I'll try to bring it back in. So I have 4 younger siblings who are from Ethiopia, and at least 2 of them living in Casper, Wyoming, or other parts of Wyoming have told us stories about times where they were the victims of racial slurs, where they were bullied because of the color of their skin, especially the younger ones who are around kids that should know better, but maybe don't, growing up in an environment where it's not really talked about. And it was really disheartening at first because it's those individual acts of racism or of racial profiling or of abuse that really strike close to home, that help people become more aware of racism. But it's difficult for us to push those stories onto major news media networks because they're so busy, shooting the bigger, flashier things. And like I said, that disheartened me. But I think that one thing that's unique about this period of time that we're in is that social media has enabled us as individuals to act as media conglomerates, to gain a following, to gain a platform, to speak up on those issues. I think it's really important that we all take advantage of that. And so to tie back into what you were talking about, the fact that other white individuals would feel comfortable approaching you because they think, oh, this individual is white, they would probably agree with what I have to say, even though you clearly don't. That is at the core of our responsibility with our privilege, especially on the internet. Whether or not we like it, there are a lot of people who either intentionally or unknowingly isolate themselves from Black and brown voices. It's because of that regardless of partisan position, we have things like the erasure of the First Nations Indigenous people in Canada, the erasure of the concept of privilege, the erasure of these very real, very powerful structural issues that people in marginalized communities have to overcome. But if we can utilize that privilege to be the voices to stand against it, to say, it doesn't matter if I look like you, I stand in solidarity with those who are being oppressed. And we do that through social media to the extent that we can reach hundreds, thousands, of millions of people. I think that's one of the best things we can do, even if we can't donate money, even if our health prevents us from participating in protests. And I don't in any way say that to minimize what happened, because it's terrible, and I sympathize. I just say that because to me, there's a certain optimism in the opportunities that are present there.
Thank you for your input. I'd also like to welcome Anis to the call. Hello, Anis. Please feel free to turn on your video if you want to.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. All right. So we've, in case you haven't picked it up, we've been talking about white privilege and how it's present and whatever, but tonight is mostly a free and open discussion for all of us to talk about, not only recognizing this privilege, but recognizing how we can use it to help our Black and Brown siblings, not just here in Wyoming, but across the world. So, welcome. Does
Thank
anybody?
you.
Yeah. Does anybody have anything to add about this whole thing?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a unique perspective for, talking about, immigrants and how they're viewed differently depending on where they come from. I'm a citizen of Australia and America, and I'm very proud of both of those. My father, however, is a white Australian. He came over a white English-speaking man in his 30s and wasn't viewed as a threat whatsoever. People don't really see them the same way they view, immigrants of Latin heritage, right? And so when growing up and even to this day, people will talk to me about, oh, see, these damn immigrants are coming here and taking our jobs and doing this, that, and the other. And I'll tell them, my father's an immigrant. And they'll be like, oh, but I'm not talking about you, which is that inherent assumption that because I'm white and my father is white, that must mean that he's not here illegally, which he is here legally, just to put that out there. He's a legal resident, but that doesn't mean inherently that he is, right? And there are Australian, English, Irish, Russian, all these different countries who are, white or white passing, who have immigrants here who are both documented and undocumented, and they all deserve rights, of course. But I think there's this assumption with white immigrants, like, oh, but we're not talking about you. It's not you that we're talking about, which implies that they're talking about immigrants of other races. And that was something growing up that I had a really hard time understanding. And my father, luckily, explained to me is these people are being racist, right? They don't see us as a threat, but they see other, people, because, we were an immigrant family. So we connected with other immigrant families from the Middle East, from South America and things like that. And so he was like, they're talking about those people, but they shouldn't, because we're all, the same. It's the same thing in the end, but people don't see it that way. That was a very rude awakening to white privilege, I realized as a child.
For sharing and talking about it. Everybody, thank you for sharing and talking about your experiences. We understand that this can bring discomfort. Looks like we've got a comment from the show. Besides privilege, you must look at how white rage and fragility and how that influences the idea of privilege. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, you mentioned the idea of white privilege to pretty much anybody in Wyoming, and you're going to get met with, oh, white people aren't privileged. Like, I've had it hard too, and mama and daddy growing up were poor and whatever. Not to say that we're all like backwards hillbillies, but like there's so many people who are just blind to that fact. So I think that everybody here agrees and knows that white privilege does exist, and that it's systemic, and it's kept in place by all of these institutions that we as a society have created. So with that being said, let's shift the conversation away from the recognition of privilege and move it towards, goodbye, Charlie. Move it towards talking about how can we use this privilege to help people out? Because, obviously there are multiple ways. I'd like to hear from the group before I get into anything that I've heard, because I'm just here really to ask questions and try to be a facilitator. I'd like to hear from you folks.
I think that this is something a lot of people struggle with in regards to like, how can I use this privilege to help other people? That's a question that's kind of hard to answer as someone with white privilege. I don't know. Like, that's something that like I don't know what, like, how can I help other people? Like, I know that I have the power to, at a protest, say, which I've been seeing a lot of videos online of people doing this, standing in front of a Black person with cops advancing. I've seen people do that. And that's a way that you can use your privilege to protect other people. And I know a lot of people can use their voices to amplify this. And so, like, an idea in my head would be, if I were to use my white privilege, how could I get lawmakers and people who would make reform happen to listen to me? You know what I mean? So, like, I feel like using that privilege to talk to lawmakers, to talk to government facilitators would be a great idea, but how do we do that is the question. How do we speak to them and get them to listen on this issue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thank you for your input. I too have seen those videos of white people standing between peaceful protesters who are people of color and the police, and that's something that us in the activist folk world like to call direct action. That's getting out there, that's doing the thing, that's actually standing between somebody who has all the power in the situation and somebody who has no power in the situation, and trying to mitigate it and find a middle ground because you have a certain stature in the situation, right? But Kayla also is talking about contacting government officials and stuff like that. And while that might not be something that's out on the front lines, not everybody is made for the front lines of activism. It's not good for everybody's mental health. It's not good for everybody's physical health. There are some people who have disabilities, for example, and they can't go out and march. Yeah. There are some people who are so depressed or have so much anxiety that if they get into a crowd like that, then they're just gonna, burst. That's fine. If you can't participate in direct action, then that's fine too. But what Kayla's talking about here is something that we should all be doing. Oh, sorry.
Hunter, may I just add, can you explain so that I can understand? There's a lot of talk of mental health and mental wellness and to support and get behind that. Sadly, there are certain people who have disabilities. They don't have the capacity, or they have what is called social anxiety. Mm-hmm. So it's not that they don't want their voices to be heard. It's just that the disability or the social anxiety or their heart is in the right place. And I just wanted to acknowledge and show my support for that. Thank you so much.
Exactly.
And I actually feel, oh, I'm so sorry. Am I stepping on anybody?
Nope, you go.
It's Zoom, so it's very hard. I actually feel pretty comfortable talking about that as well. And I think not just, of course, people with disabilities and diagnosed mental disorders, need to take care of themselves and do things within their means for activism. I think it's important for any activist to be taking care of themselves, especially in the Black community right now, because what we're seeing right now is like collective trauma, especially for Black people, where they are a target right now. And so that can be very mentally trying on them. And any activist who's out there right now, whether it be on the front lines or doing anything else, it is important to take care of yourself and do things within your means. If you have to, if you have to skip one day of protests to recollect and share things online instead, that is completely valid. And I think that should also be discussed more in the activist community. Is, direct action is great for those who can do it, but sometimes it is as simple as, I can't handle it, and I know that there are people who will, so I'm going to use my voice and my platform. I'm in Wyoming. I have a lot of white people on social media and on, Facebook, and I'm seeing, this is my audience. Here's what I'm going to do, even if I can't go out and protest right now. And in what places like Wyoming that are white communities, it's very important to do that. and it doesn't involve you having to put yourself in physical or emotional danger.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right about that. And so to kind of bounce off the points that, we've all been discussing here, obviously recognizing that these things and these barriers exist, there's also the option of indirect action. Kayla mentioned contacting government officials, that can be in a tweet, that can be in an email, that can be in a letter, a phone call. Rhiannon mentioned sharing things online, as long as, you're not doing those things with empty conscience. Oh yeah, click share, Black Lives Matter, whatever, and then you move on and never think about it again. As long as you're doing those things with a good conscience and you're doing things to supplement that, like signing a petition, maybe making a donation if you are financially able to, then, indirect action might be the place for you. So
And consistency is important on that too.
exactly.
Don't just post a picture of you holding a Black Lives Matter sign and fist and say, okay, I did my part. If you really are sharing things every day from Black speakers and Black protesters, that is the way to use your privilege and your audience as activism.
Exactly. And one thing that I will mention, which is sort of a tangent, but not really, it's related to this whole thing that we've been discussing, is there's kind of two schools of thought in activism. One of them is issue-first activism, and the other is person-first activism. We talk about this a lot on our WAA blog, which I encourage you to read it if you get a chance. I've unfortunately missed a couple of weeks because of just the state of the world and everything right now. But basically, issue first activism is when activists just go, go, go. There's issues in the world, and I need to be out there on the front lines, and I need to be sharing everything I see on social media, and I need to do this and that. And I need to be doing things, right? And while there's some people who are equipped to handle that, so many people are not. So many people are not. And that's why the WAA likes to practice what we call person first activism. Taking time for yourself as a person to, have that time for your mental health, turn off the screen, don't go to a march, like take a bath, like read a book, just have some time for yourself, because it's important for activist movements in the long run that you're as mentally healthy as you can be and as physically healthy as you can be. With that being said, person first activism does come with an inherent amount of privilege, to circle back to the privilege discussion. Us folks who practice person first activism, we're not the ones who are literally fighting for our lives on the streets in these mass protests, but we can practice person first activism. People of color can practice person first activism. But right now, especially, a lot of person first activism is rooted in privilege. That doesn't necessarily make it a horrendous thing. It just makes it something to watch out for. If you're only taking mental health days and you're not helping activism at all, then you're not a person first activist. You're just a person, So let's cycle back to anything y'all want to talk about. Is there anything that y'all have to say? Any discussions y'all would like to bring up?
I just want to add, actually, I feel like this is the first time we are in the right way. Even if you see like the international news, all of them, this is the first time that like the white privilege is really recognized by all the social media, and this is like very good thing that we can like do much better for the Black lives, as we can see, like even like the new generation. And I've been talking like to many friends, and all of them, they are surprised of the all white supporters in the streets. They are trying to support the Blacks and go to protest with them. Usually you can we saw that like before, but this is the first time that actually you can see the teenagers and the young people, students, all of them, they are working together to support like their rights. and this is really amazing. So actually, I feel like this is the first time we are going better and better. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. If anybody has anything to add to that, please feel free. But first, welcome to the Zoom call, Victoria. We're happy to have you.
Hi, thanks for hosting this. Glad to be here.
So does anybody have anything to bounce off of that? Because Anis is right. This is a movement that right now has a lot of widespread support from white people. You know, and it's interesting, right? Because it was George Floyd and his death that was the catalyst for all of this, right? There have been so many more, so many unjust deaths. You know, Breonna Taylor, who was just sitting in her apartment, you know, Ahmaud Arbery, who was just out for a jog, Tamir Rice, who was 12 years old and playing with a toy gun, you know, and I think that one thing that we need to recognize about white privilege is the fact that it is because of this privilege that it took so long for this movement to garner such support because of you know, things like that. We do have someone typing in the chat from State Senator Tom James. I imagine that Joe's going to be sending us something here in a second. Or was that the state senator that attended the protest and then got maced and detained by police? I'm unaware of his name, but I did see the photos, and that was
Hi, can you hear me?
yes. Here we go. Hi, Joe.
That rather than type it out, this was on from State Senator Tom James from Wyoming, right?
Mhm.
Telling everybody he wishes them that they have a good constitutional right to protest. However, he says Wyoming Statute 6-2-602 allows the use of self-defense and no duty to retreat in the case of someone destroying someone's property or someone becoming a threat to your well-being. He also goes on to say, if you look at registered gun ownership, Wyoming has 3 times as many gun owners per capita. We have the most. In short, we will protect your constitutional rights, but we will not hesitate to take out the enemy, foreign or domestic. That's one of our state senators, guys. So what do you think his view is on racism and Black Lives Matter and other things? That's just one. We are controlled by a Republican legislature. So I'm just saying, there's others out there that have this same sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, that's all I'll say.
Thank you for your input, Joe. And it is tough to hear those things from our elected officials. That's why it's so important for us to get out and vote. You know, but Joe did come up with a good discussion question for us. You know, these are the people who lead our state, right? How do you think they feel about this Black Lives Matter movement? I'm sure that we all know the answer to that one, right? But why do you think they feel that way? And what can we, as people with positions of privilege, do to maybe help mitigate the situation? We want to hear from you.
As a resident of Wyoming, I think that yes, it is important for us to all go out and vote. And it's also good to be informed of the people you're voting for and people who are running, and made aware of, you know, what their standards are, and like make sure that you know that the person that you're voting for, it has ideals that you share with them. And yes, here in Wyoming, we do live in a red state. And sometimes when you're voting for people, I don't know where I was going with that, but all I'm trying to say is just make sure that you're informed on who you're voting for and why you're voting for them, and not so much just because everyone else is voting, if that makes any sense. For the same person, I guess.
Yeah, I think that makes a good point. Inform yourself. Go out and vote. Obviously, we're a nonpartisan organization. We're not going to tell you who to vote for, whether that be a political party or a particular candidate. But voting, especially in the case of young people, has the ability to make so much of a difference. A large majority of young people in Wyoming don't show up to vote. It's a lot of the older folks, and of course, they obviously have the right to vote, and we're not trying to say that they don't. But what we're trying to say is, if more younger votes were cast, it would have the ability to make a lot of difference. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I want to say, like, in addition, like, to voting to the right person, in the meanwhile, we can say, like, even the politicians, they're trying to have, like, the voice of the majority. So if we keep, like, keep sharing all these stuff, hashtags, all these things, like, if all the politicians trying to see like there is a lot of people trying to support an issue or a right, they're gonna go for it. Maybe not directly, but they're gonna be, like, enforced to go with the wave, so they can support the people that they have, especially to get their voices or to get their for the election, I mean.
Yeah. So I'm very new to Wyoming. I moved here in January with my parents, and previously I was living in New Jersey, which is a predominantly blue state during national elections, and then I went to college in Iowa, which is a known swing state. And the county in which I was, like, my school is one that predominantly is very left-leaning. And, like, during the primary, there was, like, a scene on CNN in which, like, the Bernie and Warren sections took over the Joe Biden section. And it's mostly young people. It's a lot of college students who were involved in electoral politics and canvassing during that time. And still, at the same time, I feel like a lot of people were really frustrated in how the Iowa caucus was handled. Like, seeing a lot of problems with the caucus system, that ties were broken with coin flips, and how that feels wrong in something that's supposed to be democratic and reflect what people think. So I think thinking beyond voting in terms of, like, maintaining direct action efforts beyond just now, and how to make that part of our lives going forward.
Yeah, you make a great point, Victoria. It's really good to think critically about everything, and that includes voting. So let's think even more critically about voting for a second, tie it back into kind of the main conversation that we've been having this evening, white privilege, right? It is substantially easier for white people to vote in this country, just as a whole. And that's something that we need to recognize. Voter ID laws that I don't believe we have in Wyoming. I've only ever voted by absentee ballot here before. But I don't believe we have a voter ID law here in Wyoming. But those do disproportionately affect people of color. Not only, like, in the actual process of voting, but also, the fact that some people cannot make it to their local DMV. Some people do not drive a vehicle to get a driver's license, which is your government issued ID. Some people, take public transportation only. Some people work the entire time that the DMV is open and can't get a driver's license, you know? And that's, you know, not only like a driver's license, but like your just regular state issued ID if you choose not to get a driver's license as well, right? And then not only that, you know, things like gerrymandering, which have made it significantly harder for people of color to have their voices heard because they are broken up into blocks of people who have completely different views than them. And you know, their voice ends up being stifled. You know, again, this whole thing, this whole system, this whole country that we live in, it all ties back to this concept of the privileges that we are given based on the color of our skin that none of us white folk asked for, you know, and, you know, most people probably wouldn't be happy about it if they, you know, actually took some time to look into it, right? But, oh, we have a comment from Joe. I'll read that in a second. But to make a long story short, you know, we do have to recognize that even voting, which all of us like to champion as the, you know, that's going to help us, that's going to be our change, you know, that's going to be the answer to everything. It can't always be the answer to everything for everyone. From Joe, he says, I believe that voter ID does affect the Wind River Reservation and natives. That's very sad to hear. And I believe there were some issues in the last voting cycle. Okay. So honestly, like, we as activists should be hearing about these things and doing more about these things. And yet, you know, we're not. A lot of these issues get swept under the rug. So does anybody want to talk about that? How we could maybe help that out, or, you know, just do something to make it better in general?
I think staying in tune with what's going on in the news in Wyoming is helpful, and trying to make sure others stay in tune. I know if there's more education on the issues and topics that are important and things that happen, you know, not everyone knew that there were some issues up here. I do live in Lander, so I did hear about that. There were some issues with ID cards and a few Native population trying to vote, and it got, I don't know, it was a big kind of hot mess. I'm hoping that nothing's going to go next round, but there's also, I don't know what all the other counties are doing, but Fremont County was trying to parse down to 7 polling places. I don't know if everyone else is that way. That's something that everyone should be aware of. I don't know that everyone is going into this election cycle yet. So, and not even just voting, just other issues, race issues, equality issues, gender issues. There's lots of things that go on that not everyone knows about. And if they hear about it, it's not always on everyone's radar. So trying to stay on top of things. I try to stay in tune with all the different counties' news channels now that everyone has pretty much their own online news source. Trying to jump around from here and there to stay on topic with everyone is something that I've personally been trying to do.
And, you know, that's something we should all be trying to do, is all stay informed. Sorry about that. Victoria King says in the chat, voting is not the end all be all for the betterment of our futures and communities. And that is absolutely correct. You know, protest, contact your elected officials after the voting cycle ends. You know, you have options outside of this. And one thing that, you know, as the executive director of the Wyoming Association of Activists, that I have seen is people in Wyoming saying, oh, well, you know, protesting and activism, it doesn't actually make change. Just go to the ballot box and that's where you'll get your change. But that's not always the truth. You know, not only is it not the truth that you'll get the change you desire, right? It's also not the truth that activism doesn't work. Activism doesn't work. Oh my gosh. Activism does work. it does make communities better. You know, let's talk about the Stonewall protests. Let's talk about the Montgomery bus boycotts. Let's talk about Selma. Let's talk. There's so many options for people when it comes to direct action and indirect action. I don't want to hear from anybody that voting is the only option for us. We have
Hunter, may I?
what?
Hunter, may I add something to that?
Please do.
Hello, everyone. This is Victoria. The reason, what makes me say that, as a First Nations Native American person, see, in my world, this Zoom meeting is going haywire. This Zoom meeting is going off the tracks. Let me tell you why. When your people came here, your people and my people, so both of our people, we came together and we signed treaties. And when these events happen, many treaties were signed, by the way, and the treaty signing for this whole discussion is not being acknowledged. And I, as an Indigenous person, I really have a problem with that, because what you have to understand is that to us, brown Native people, treaties are international legal documents. And the treaties were signed to be meant to be perpetual, forever and ever, on and on, for all time. And it makes me sad, and it's unfortunate that I, as an Indigenous person, am the only one who is acknowledging the treaties and supporting the treaties. And when we signed, when my people came to when our people came together, I don't want to like put us separate. When our people came together, my ancestors really did want both of our communities to honor the treaties. They were heartfelt, and they wanted them to be honored for the betterment of our future, and both sides of the border, I have to say, both Canada and the United States. And you need to be aware of, coming from an Indigenous person, having anti-immigrant views and saying, referring to those outside of the United States as murderers, and Black and brown people are rapists and criminals, is not honoring the treaties. And I don't know how many of you know or are aware of the treaties, but please know and understand, it really was a beautiful event. And I hope that you look up the treaties, and I hope that you, to be a good ally to Black and brown people, slavery was not, to support slavery was dishonoring the treaties. I could go on and on, but I encourage you, please, to be a good ally to brown, First Nations, Native Americans. Please look up the treaty relationship. Please know that it was a beautiful event for these documents. These documents still stand, by the way. These documents still hold. And I encourage all of you to please look up the treaties, and please know that they are honest and honorable documents to uphold. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing, Victoria. And yes, we absolutely agree that these treaties are not being honored, and our Native American siblings across Wyoming and across, the US and Canada are, quite frankly, being subjugated. Joe mentioned in the chat a killing of someone in the Northern Arapaho tribe from police this year. It's a huge systemic issue. And I I don't know a lot about the specifics of the treaties, but I do know a lot about the general idea behind the treaties, and how people were going to be peaceful and parse out the land, and then white people came in and stole the land. That's why we at the WAA try to begin our events with a recognition of the stolen land. We did at this event, and we will at our other events as well. And quite frankly, we think that it's unacceptable how Native Americans have been treated in Wyoming and are still being treated in Wyoming. A lot of people are confined to the Riverton area, and growing up in Casper, you wouldn't believe the things that I've heard about them. I'm sure you would, but that they're all the people who run the casinos, and the people who are addicts, and the people who like couldn't get off the reservation, and that type of language and that type of dehumanizing attitude is so disgusting. So I'm going to say right here, right now, the WAA stands with Native Americans, and we want to be better allies to you. And thank you so much for bringing up the discussion of the treaties, because it is important. We do stand with you 100%. And I personally am going to educate myself a lot more on those treaties because of tonight's discussion. And not only do we stand with the Native Americans in the state, we stand with Asian Americans, African Americans, people of all races, all colors, all genders, sexualities. The WAA tries to be as intersectional as possible. So thank you for bringing that up. It's an important discussion, and it's one.
Thank you, Hunter. Another word you could use, if I may, is inclusive. If you really know Native American culture, we are an inclusive culture. Men, women, immigrant people, visitors from other places. If I may, thank you so much. Yeah.
Yes, and thank you.
Yeah, bravo to you, Hunter. You are doing so beautiful, and if I may, you make me feel so proud.
Thank you so much. I really do want to say, I'm not doing this to make anybody feel proud. I'm doing this because it's necessary. We need to do better, and that's just the fact of the matter. We need to do better. We need to be better. We need to help better. We need to be inclusive, and that's one thing that I do admire about the Native Americans. Everybody who I have ever met who is Native American is so kind, so inclusive, and so intersectional in their activism. They talk about things like colorism, which I didn't know much about before I met Native American activists. They talk about things like Two-Spirit people, who they held as sacred far before the LGBTQ plus rights movement ever took place here in America. There are so many things that Native Americans do and say in terms of not only activism but their culture that I think need to be talked about more, because there's a lot of stigma surrounding you folks here, especially in Wyoming, and it's sad. And if there's anything that the WA can do to help, then obviously we know that it's not your job as a person of color to educate us and tell us everything to do, right? But we do appreciate any tips on how to be a better ally, because that's why we created this organization, is to help people, everybody, no matter who they are. So it looks like it is 8:16. This talk is set to end at 8:30. So we're probably going to have to start wrapping things up here in a little bit. But does anybody else have any thoughts, regarding race, white privilege, the Black Lives Matter movement, anything else that y'all can think of?
In closing, may I have a suggestion?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure if any of you are aware of a Native American film called, get your pens out, everybody, get your paper ready. a Native American film called Rumble, The Indians Who Rocked the World. Please, I encourage all of you, please use this documentary award-winning film. This film is from, this film is from Canada, and please use this film and encourage others to see this film. If you have not seen this film already, it is so, so beautiful. It is so historically and so well done. Please use this platform, this Zoom meeting, to encourage others to watch this film, Rumble, the Indians Who Rocked the World. It's about, if you watch the documentary, we'll go more into it, but it's about the history, about how Native Americans influenced music in the States. Please use this film as an educational tool to combat racism. Please use this film to educate yourself and to educate others. It is so beautiful. It is such a beautiful, heartfelt message. And thank you. I encourage all of you, once again, please look up and honor the treaty relationship that the First Nations people had, and please know that the treaties were beautiful and historical documents meant to be honored. I thank you so much for this time. Rumble, the Indians Who Rocked the World. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for being such an active participant in tonight's event. You know, I love hearing voices, you know, not just from around the state, but from around the world. You said you were from Canada. I think that's amazing that this event reached that far. So we're gonna do a little bit of a closing exercise here real quick. And it's not mandatory. I am going to be calling on people by name and asking all of y'all to participate. If you don't want to, just say pass. You know, I'm not going to make you talk. But I'm going to ask you to tell us 3 things. One thing you learned from today's event that you didn't know before, and you know, like how you're going to use that going forward, right? 2 is one thing you thought went well about today's event, and 3 is one thing that you think could be improved about today's event. At the WAA, we are always looking to improve. We do internal event reports about all of our events to talk as activists about how we can be better. I'm going to go counterclockwise from the appearance on my screen, and I'm just going to start calling people out. Like I said, you can say pass, and we'll use this to fuel a broader discussion, not just here tonight, but as an organization in the WAA. So we'll start with Kayla.
So one thing that I learned from this call, especially from Victoria King over here, is to inform myself about the Native American history of the place that I live, because again, I grew up very sheltered and very brought away from that sort of thing. And I can use my privilege here to inform myself about those things and use tools suggested to me in order to be more informed and educated about that kind of stuff. One thing that I thought went well was there were very little interruptions, and there was a lot of listening going on when people were speaking, and not so much trying to combat it. And it was very understanding and very, safe for people to talk and not be interrupted or try to be talked over or try to be talked down to. Something that I think could have gone better perhaps was, I don't know, I guess I kind of want to put this more towards myself rather than to the call, if that makes any sense, because I can't really think of anything that went wrong in this call. But like for me, personally, I feel like something that I could have done better would be to articulate my thoughts and try to make it more about, I guess, the root of the problem. You know what I mean? Like, to make it more about or ask more questions like, what can I do? You know, and Victoria, again, did a very good job of making suggestions and making sure that we know what we can do better.
All right, thank you so much. Ender, if you'd like to share.
Sure. So one thing that I learned from today that I didn't know before, I didn't actually know that the voter bringing your ID to vote thing, I thought that was fake. I didn't think that was a real thing. Like I knew that in the case of Native American people, their IDs usually can't be used for much of anything, which is really unfortunate. It's a valid ID. Why can't we take them in places like the front desk at a supermarket that I used to work at? But I didn't think that was a real thing, so that's kind of shocked me. One thing that I thought went really well, like Kayla said, everybody had their turn. There was no interruptions. It was good. I don't think there was really anything that I would change about this call. I learned a lot. I listened, which was my goal for today, was to sit back, listen, and learn. So yeah.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And Megan, if you'd like to share.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Megan, and I'm brand new to this whole discussion, so I was just here to listen and to learn. So one thing I didn't know before was pretty much everything because I'm so new to this whole discussion, but I did not know about the treaties, and so I want to thank Victoria for sharing about that, and I will check out that film that you recommended and look more into that and try to educate myself on that topic. What went well, I just really appreciate the way that you've moderated the discussion, Hunter, and the way that everyone has been just listening to each other so respectfully and sharing. It's just really awesome. And what could be improved? I don't have anything for the rest of you or for the call, but for me, maybe to share a little bit next time. I just felt really nervous and intimidated because I feel like I don't know much and I don't want to say the wrong thing or sound like an idiot, basically. So, but thank you for doing this and for letting me be a part of the discussion.
Thank you so much, Megan. And just as kind of an aside here, you know, everybody is encouraged to speak up at these events. Don't be afraid to say the wrong thing, because saying and doing the wrong thing, as long as it's not something that's like so overtly offensive that everybody is like, whoa, hold on a minute there. That's how we all learn as people. That's how we overcome the structures of hate that are put into our society. Thank you so much for showing up. I saw you taking notes and everything. So I hope that you did learn a lot. It sounds like you did. We're going to move on to Anis.
Okay, actually, something I learned that now I have like an interesting movie that I want to watch related to the native people, and actually I haven't seen anything related to this thing, so maybe I should inform myself more about this topic. Actually, what's something really was amazing tonight was like if you can see like the range of the ages that we have for the participants, we can see like different perspectives from everyone, and this is really awesome. If I want to say something that we need like to tell our friends, our family about what's going on, about our like perspectives, what we can like learn from these kind of discussions. It's really helpful to educate each other about these topics, and it's really important, especially because there are a lot of people that they are not like taking any responsible for this thing. So it's going to be like a good chance for us to educate our neighbors, our family, everything like that. And finally, I want to thank all of you because I'm really proud to be here with you talking about something like that in Wyoming. Thank you.
Thank you, Anis. To the person who just joined with the user Zoom is Square, I've muted you because I don't know who you are. And hello, the username makes me a little suspicious. Will you, and we're also at the end of our discussion. So we're just going around getting feedback from everybody. So please take no offense to the mute. I'm very sorry. Oh, sorry, Zoom. Anyway, I hope that it's just a creative, fun username. We're gonna move on and ask Haley for your input.
Hi. Okay, so there were a couple of things I learned. I think just I'm probably going to echo a lot of people's thoughts at this point in time. So I apologize if I'm sounding repetitive, but I do want to learn more about the treaties myself, and we'll watch the film. Absolutely. I'm very excited for that. I do live so close to the reservation. I think it's imperative for me to learn about Native and First Nation issues and ideas and anything I can to do my part to further educate myself. Let's see here, and I think everything went really well. Like I was so excited it went so well. We even got someone from Canada in on our call, which is awesome. I'm hoping more talks, more conversations, more education reaches more people, which equals betterment of all. I'm a big proponent of education and getting more and more educated. As far as what could go better, I'm not sure. I think more people would be wonderful. I think more engagement, but again, no pressure to anyone who doesn't feel comfortable, absolutely. But that would be the only thing, is encouraging some more engagement.
Okay. All right, so sorry, Matthew, that you're joining at the end here and that you're not able to provide us with any feedback. So I'm gonna go up to Victoria Park.
Hi. Yeah, one thing I learned is how little I know about Indigenous history in this country and globally, and how that has been erased from much of my education and in my personal life, not knowing very many Indigenous people, and how it's on me to learn more and take that first step. And that's something I think going forward will help me be a better ally and activist. I think one thing that went really well, as many people said, is I think everyone was really respectful and really good at listening, which as non-Black people is really key in how we learn and learning from everyone else's experience. I think one thing that can be improved is I am really, really, really nervous right now to speak. As one of few people of color here, it can be scary in a room full of, white strangers to feel like because I know I'm not a perfect person or a perfect activist, and I'm still learning so much, and I don't want to be like a voice representing many people of color, and that can be kind of intimidating. So, yeah.
I am sorry that you feel that way. We did invite several people or people of color to this event. We spoke to the NAACP in Cheyenne, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference up in Casper. seems that everybody has ended up busy. You know, we didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable or anything like that. I'm sorry. I am putting that down in my notes. I'm taking some very detailed notes here. All right. And Victoria King.
I just wanted to say, in my Native American culture, gender roles are very, very important. Thank you for bringing up both the men in the discussion and of course the woman in the discussion. Thank you for bringing up the immigrant community, the faith community. I don't know what else could be improved. Hunter, you are beautiful. You did a wonderful job. I am a huge, huge fan of the film Rumble, the Indians Who Rocked the World. This documentary film is like in my top 5 all-time documentary films. I'm a big music fan. I hope you look up the film. I hope that you enjoy the film. And thank you everyone for attending, and please watch Rumble, the Indians Who Rock the World. And there's a lot of music in the film. I really hope you enjoy these artists and the music that they make. Thank you so much. And I have to say, all of you are so, so beautiful. You did such a great job. Thank you so, so much. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll just be delivering a few closing remarks on behalf of the WAA. And first, I'd like to go through the same 3 questions that y'all went through. So first of all, something that I learned is just in general some steps to be a better ally. I think Victoria King brought up some great ideas for everybody. You know, not to sound like a broken record here, but like y'all have said, you know, listening, oh my gosh, brain fart. Reading the treaties, you know, watching movies that are made to, you know, educate. I think those things are important. One thing that I think went well, again, not to sound like a broken record, but thank you all so much for staying kind, respectful, not interrupting each other, being really good not to step on each other's toes. It was a really great event in that regard overall. And as for things that I'd like to see, you know, as Victoria Park mentioned, I also Black Belt Eagle Scout is an awesome Indigenous musician from Washington State. Ooh. But as Victoria Park was mentioning, I think it's important for us to hear more from people of color, because this kind of just became an echo chamber, if I'm being honest. And if y'all know what I'm trying to say here, you know, we all agreed with each other, you know, and everybody is like, yeah, like we're such an ally and whatever. But like, I really want activism that's not performative. Not to say that today was performative. I think we had a great discussion. But I think that it's important for us to actually hear from the people who we're trying to be better allies to. And I think that the WAA needs to do a better job of reaching out. It's not always super easy just because, you know, we live in Wyoming and it is Wyoming. But I don't think that's really an excuse. I think we need to help everybody out. So final remarks, and then I'll let y'all go. I know we're a few minutes over time. Thank you for being so patient. Black lives matter, first of all. And, you know, Native lives, Asian lives, Middle Eastern lives, immigrant lives, you know, all lives matter. Yes, nobody's saying that all lives don't matter, but right now we're fighting for justice for people of color who are disproportionately affected by some of the policies and procedures that we have in our country. So the WAA is not afraid to come out and say that, you know, Black lives matter, and we support protesters who are trying to fight for their rights. We would also like to say that discussions like these are great and they're going to help people out in the future. And that's why we'd like to mention that it's not enough to be non-racist. You have to be anti-racist, and you have to know the difference between those things. A non-racist is, you know, this white person who sits there and they're like, oh, you know, I'm not racist. You know, I have the Black cousin or whatever, and we get along just fine. And, you know, I don't try to step on anybody's toes in regards to race. I don't see color people, right? But you have to be anti-racist. You have to actively fight against racism when you see it in your family, in your friends, in your community, in your daily life. And that's what we're trying to do at the WAA. So that will be our closing remarks for this event. We'd also like to point out that on June 28th, we have an event going on. It's called We're Still Here. It's the 51st anniversary of the Stonewall riots, which were one of the first steps in getting equality and the fight for LGBT equality. One thing that's important to note there is that Stonewall was not the peaceful, happy thing that people like to make it out to be. It was Black and brown trans women who were literally willing to fight for their rights. And obviously at the WAA, we don't promote or wish a form of violent protest upon anybody, but we do have to realize where the roots of activism do come from. So with that being said, thank you all for coming out tonight. We hope to see you on our June 28th event. And thank you all for participating in this discussion. And yeah, have a great night. Have a great rest of your week. And Black Lives Matter and activists, we all have to band together until our nation agrees. Good night, everybody.